Hi folks, and welcome to this video on Chapter 2, A Strategic Framework for Compensation. In this chapter, we're going to look at why the same compensation system that is successful in one company may not work in another, how the strategic framework, which we're going to introduce you to here, it's a strategic framework for compensation. It can actually be used as a tool to design a reward and compensation system that's most effective for any organization. So the framework isn't going to change. That's why it's a framework, right? But you have to make some decisions or know enough about your company in order to implement the proper compensation system. So hopefully this framework will help you to do that. We're going to look at the three main sets of elements within that framework, okay, and explain how they're related to each other. We're going to describe one of the three main sets of elements, which is managerial strategies that an organization can adopt, and look at the impact that it's going to have on their compensation system. We're going to look at the main determinants of a managerial strategy to explain how they can be used to select the most appropriate strategy, analyze any organization to determine which managerial strategy is the most appropriate, and discuss how things have changed socioeconomically in North America over the past while, and explain its impact on compensation systems and reward systems. So let's begin. Now, the two firms that they start talking about in the chapter are Cook Foods, which is more of a chicken processing plant, and LSE, or LS Electrogalvanizing, which is, again, a production plant, but it provides galvanizing, but it does it in a little bit different way. It's organized a little bit differently than Cook. So let's talk a little bit about those two organizations and their compensation systems. So if we look at LSE, it's a lot more automated. So the workers are a lot more skilled. They use more technology and machinery in their jobs. They're paid a salary. So although they're production oriented, they're paid a salary, not hourly, and it's based on the number of jobs they can do because they want to make the employees interchangeable. So the more skills they have, the more they're going to be paid. So this is more of a pay for knowledge kind of environment. They also have gain sharing programs that are based on productivity. So employees will make more if the company is more productive. So they must have measures of productivity. They get excellent benefits, and they also have profit sharing. And they're paid more than their competition pays its workers. So LSE Galvanizing has what we would call a very expensive, very rich compensation system. Now, if we compare that to Cook Foods, where they gut chickens, it's more production oriented yet again, but it's more centered around what we call a chain. And I only call it a chain because the chickens are actually held from a hook that is linked to a chain. And these chickens rattle past workers at a rate of 90 chickens a minute, so they have to gut them, they have to slice them open, decapitate them, clean out their innards, all those kinds of things, right? So they don't have the pay innovations that LSE has. In fact, what they do is they would pay their workers barely more than minimum wage. They have to have very little skill in order to do the chicken gutting process and decapitate them. Their healthcare benefits are minimal. And again, they're just paid above minimum wage. So you can see here for two different kinds of companies, two different types of functions, two totally different compensation systems. Cook Foods management would say, well, you know, what kind of skill does it take to gut chickens? Not much, so we're not going to pay a lot. So jobs that require very little or marginal level of skills, or skills that are in vast supply, very little training required, they're going to get paid less. Whereas at LSE, or LSE Galvanizing, those people are looking for workers that are a lot more skilled and can do more than one job. So they're going to have to compensate them differently. Which compensation system is the most effective? Well, you know what? I think if you talk to the senior management at Cook Foods, they think theirs is very effective. It's very cost effective, right, for what they need. And I'm sure LSE Galvanizing would be saying, yes, ours is richer, but we notice payback, even though we have to pay more, in the quality of the work, the level, the kind of customers we get a lot of repeat business, we get more customers, you know, we're a premier galvanizing plant. We're better than the rest because our employees are better, right? So again, it really depends on what the ends are that you're trying to achieve. So it kind of goes back to what's your organization strategy and what kind of a company do you want to be seen as. Now, if we look at the different organizational systems, the characteristics of organizations, we have to consider the size of the organization, an organization's corporate strategy, its structure, and technology. If we're looking at, and these are some of the elements of what we're going to talk about now as the strategic framework that companies need to know about in order to determine how we're going to craft our compensation system. So let's begin. Now, first of all, I'm not going to talk a lot about strategy. Your textbook does talk a lot about organizational strategy, but I'm going to save that for a business strategy course that you may decide you're going to take later down the road, and I do highly recommend that. But I'm going to focus more on size, structure, and technology, as well as the other elements in the framework. So if we look at the framework itself, in the task environment and domain, we're really looking here, or first of all, maybe I should back up a bit. The three main sets of the framework are contextual variables, managerial strategy, and structural variables. If we look at the contextual variables, these is one of those three main elements that we talked about before. So remember what we said over here, the three main sets of elements? The three main ones are your contextual variables, your structural variables, and your managerial strategy. So that's how it kind of relates back to that discussion there, that learning outcome. So if you look at it, we're going to look at the context within which the company is operating. So we're going to look at its size, the nature of its workforce, who they want to hire, the role technology plays in the business, our overall business strategy, the company's goals, and the environment within which it operates. So what's its mission? What's its vision? Who are its customers, its suppliers? What are they requiring or expecting from the company? What are the products and services it offers? Its strategy determines what are the overall corporate objectives going to be and what's the plan going to be for, attaining overall company targets. So does the company want to increase earnings per share by 5%? Do they want to increase revenues by 25%, reduce costs by 15%? What are those overall company objectives that are going to be laid out or hopefully realized if we have a good business plan or a business strategy? We look at the size of the company. It says how big do we want to be, how many employees do we want to have, and what skills do we want that workforce to have based on our size. And again, what role is technology going to play? Are we going to use more or less technology to meet our goals? Are we highly dependent on robotics and automation, right? Because that's going to determine the skill level of the workforce we need. If we're going to use a lot of technology, it might mean we have a smaller organization, right? It depends. We're also going to look at structural variables to determine what the impact of that's going to be on compensation. So how are jobs going to be designed? So what kinds of jobs? So what's in the job description and what are you going to do in your job, right? Who's going to make the decisions on a day-to-day basis for the job? Is it going to be the employees? It's going to be more, hands-off management in terms of all of the day-to-day decisions, or, like if you're cook foods, senior management's going to be making all the decisions. But if you're LSE galvanizing, I'll bet you the employees are going to be making a lot more decisions because they have a lot more autonomy in how the job is done. What's our quality control system going to be? Are we going to manage it? Are the employees going to manage it? Are we both going to manage it? What is it going to look like? What kind of communication and information are we going to share? So how are we going to communicate within our organization? So is it a top-down approach where management communicates to us? Is it going to be bottom-up? Is it going to be a bit of both? And how are we going to get together and coordinate different roles within the company? So we know, for example, marketing, engineering, production, customer service, those guys better be talking, right? Because in any company, if there's a problem with the way the product is manufactured, we're not going to be able to market the product properly. Customer service is going to be inundated with calls. So the idea is, how are we going to work together to coordinate our roles, our functions, to help customers troubleshoot problems, to help suppliers? How are we going to be organized to handle all that? And then look at the managerial strategy. So how are we going to manage our people? What kind of senior management team do we want? All right, do we want a senior management team that's going to involve employees? Do we want a senior management team that's going to dictate and tell employees what to do? That's going to have an implication for the kind of workforce that we're going to hire. If we want thinking people who are going to be challenged by their work, probably managerial strategy is going to be a little more hands-off, right? Probably decision making and leadership is going to be a little more hands-off. Employees are going to be making more of their own decisions, going to have a little more autonomy in the workplace. So a lot of these variables will cross. If you want your employees to do more, bigger thinking challenge, but more skills that you want them to have, you're going to have to pay them more. You're going to have to find out what makes those employees tick, what they're expecting of a job, what they're expecting pay-wise, and that's just not base pay. Healthcare-wise, benefit-wise, those kinds of things, that's going to impact what people want as well, what they're expecting of their total compensation or total rewards package. So you have to start thinking about how the kinds of people and the kind of work they're going to do is going to impact their compensation. So these things all tie together. Now, if we look specifically at the managerial strategy variable here, we're going to talk about three major ones: classical, human relations, and high involvement. Classical managerial strategies are probably what Cook Foods is using, right? Thinking is separate from doing, meaning that you don't have to think about your job. It's a very routinized, very mundane job. You can do it. It's very repetitive, very little skill to do it. So you don't have to really think a lot about that. In fact, you don't have to think about much at all, right? You just do your job, all right? And we in senior management will do all the thinking for you, all right? Human relations is a little bit like classical. The major difference here would be that there's probably a little more done by companies to make sure that employees are maybe working a little bit more closely together, and there's a little more social interaction among employees. And high involvement is probably more what LSE galvanizing would be using. LSE galvanizing would probably be a kind of company that's getting their employees, building the skill levels of their employees to make sure that the work is interesting, challenging, and that they can actually do more than one job in an organization. Workers know more about more than just one job. That means if somebody's away, they can do more. They understand a little bit more about how the different jobs interrelate to each other. They can support each other better. So they're basically running the operation, not totally on their own, but they're making a lot of decisions on the fly and probably making good decisions because they understand the business. So they're more highly involved in the operations in the day-to-day. Now, when we look a little bit more at culture, the kind of culture we're trying to create is also going to affect the compensation system and the kinds of employees we hire. We want to make sure that we've got employees that support what we believe our organization should stand for. We want to make sure that companies care about the customer in the way we want them to care about the customer. You can go to any company's website and you can get a mission and a vision statement. And they'll tell you what we stand for, what our guiding beliefs are, what we think, what kinds of employees we want to hire, what kind of attitudes we support, what kind of employees we think would be the most value for our organization to help us to support our customers and to support other employees and to help us enact our business strategy. So that culture is really a guide to employee behavior because it gives us a lot of information on what companies are really looking for in their employees. And if you fit the bill and you can be relied upon, you're dependable, you're suitable to that company, they'll pay you. They'll pay you to be the kind of employee that they're looking for. So if we look at some of the determinants of the most appropriate managerial strategy, we see here that we have several. Now these ones are mostly on the contextual variable side, right? Because we're looking at the environment, right? That's your vision, your mission, the products and services you offer, who your customers are, the nature of your workforce, the kinds of skills that you want them to have, size of the company, technology, and again, corporate strategy. I'm going to focus mostly on the nature of the workforce, the organization size, and a little bit on technology. All of them you can read in your textbook. But if we look at size, we usually tend to find larger organizations, particularly some public sector organizations, use more of a classical or more of a human relations strategy because sometimes they need a more formal organization structure because they're larger, right? There's so many people. They're not all doing the same thing. They don't all share jobs. They specialize more. So it's a little more compartmentalized. Hewlett-Packard is a company that traditionally used this approach. Yeah, Hewlett Packard is a company that's traditionally, as a larger organization, was a little more human relations focused, but now that they've cut back, and in all of these businesses, whether it's the banking industry, high tech companies, of which Hewlett Packard is probably in there in that group, they've had to become a lot more nimble and responsive to customers, and many of them have found that by becoming smaller, they're a lot more responsive to customers. So while they've traditionally been more human relations focused, they're now becoming a lot more high involvement. And you find it really does make a difference in the product as well. It's a great product. If you've ever owned one, it's a really good product, and it's very well serviced. So sometimes it's not that when companies are downsizing, they're becoming less efficient. They're becoming not just more cost effective and efficient, but they're able to respond better to customers. Now, if we look at the nature of the workforce, we're talking a little bit now about the contextual variable that looks like at the type of people we're hiring. We find now that we've got people that are more highly educated, more highly skilled, and some of them may even be professional accountants, professional HR employees with designations, that kind of thing. They're learning a lot more about ethics, and they understand a little bit more about a tie-in between a company strategy and how that will affect the kind of people that they hire and they're looking for. People that can make that strategy happen, people that can make it work, people that can deal with customer issues and problems and not shove them off to the side. They're better educated, they're professional, and they know how they would like to be treated, and they treat customers accordingly. So we normally find that in these kinds of organizations, we need to use more of a high involvement strategy, which gives people more autonomy to make decisions within the organization on an ongoing basis, and management obviously must have a lot of trust in them. Classical organizations are designed to use employees that have relatively low skill levels, like in Cook Foods, right? Their approach to motivation and control is more suited to workers who their primary motivation is, give me my paycheck. I don't care if the work is interesting, if I'm challenged, I just want my check, right? I want my health care benefits. And by the way, in Cook Foods, they're not that great, right? But the idea is, if you invest in yourself and your education, you've developed better skills, there is a higher likelihood that you can earn more money, not just what goes into your bank account on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, but better health care benefits, better pension, better everything, a better all over total rewards package. But you're going to be working a little bit harder for it. It's a high involvement organization. They're going to expect more. And that's kind of where LSE Galvanizing is at. Now, what are some of the trends in managerial and compensation strategies? Again, what we're finding is that because of these socioeconomic changes in people, their educational levels are increasing. There is more increased economic security by and large. Some people may not agree with that. They might say, well, we never know if our jobs are going to last. Yes, but if the more skill you have, the better educated you are, the more likely it is that you would be unemployed for a shorter period of time. So the economic security is there, and social security is improved. Social values are a lot more democratic, and that's why we found that those organizations that are hiring people with higher education, higher level of skill, they're evolving more toward the high involvement kind of strategies, and those compensation systems do cost more overall for them to implement. So always have to think about, what is it that we're expecting our employees to know how to do, and how are we going to compensate them? Because like we said in our first video series, you don't want to lose these people that you've gone through the time to recruit, to select, to train, and then you find they're going to go to a competitor. Oh no. After all that, to recruit, to select, and to train cost about 2 to 3 times somebody's salary, okay, in the first year that they're with you. So you don't want to lose that investment. Now, all of these conditions, as we said here, those fundamental socioeconomic changes being the increased education levels, more economic security, more democratization of society, they kind of work against classical and human relations organizations. So we're really looking for organizations that are really going toward high involvement, which is a higher price tag. Okay, it's going to cost more for those kinds of compensation systems, right? Now, it doesn't mean that classical firms don't have their place. If you're sort of Nike and you're operating in Indonesia, right? Not much health and safety there, more management or the supervisors are on the job. It's a more routinized job. That's why you see, Apple setting up in China for their some of their products, and as I said before, Nike setting up in Indonesia, right? In some of these countries, classical firms or that classical managerial strategy seems to work. Yes, it is less expensive. Yes, companies are getting bigger bang for their buck because they're selling to an international market where people are prepared to pay the price of those products, right? But as I said, you will see, depending on where your company chooses to operate, what countries they're in, some strategies that may work in Indonesia aren't going to work in North America. So we hire managers to suit the environment as well. So the managerial strategy is going to play a role in our compensation system. All right. One thing I want you to make sure you do is certainly make sure you read the chapter, because these videos and any of the chapters are not meant to be comprehensive of everything, because it would be tough to listen to a video, a long video, even if we broke it up. We want you focusing on and engaging with each other. And in order to do that and stick to your deadlines, you need to know what's due this week, what's coming up for next week, so you can plan. So just make sure you do take some time to read the textbook, to do your quizzes, participate in your discussion boards, and put points on the board all the way through the week. Anyway, it was nice to chat with you, and have a great week.